The hum of the engine was a steady companion. 300 miles of asphalt separated my front door from my son's. For most of the drive, that hum was the only sound. The radio stayed silent. I prefer my own thoughts, the rumble of the road, a low bass line to the melody of memory. I thought about the last time I'd made this drive. Christmas. The time before that, my grandson Jamal's 8th grade graduation. Each trip was a pilgrimage of sorts, a journey to remind them I was still here. To remind myself, too, I suppose. The old Ford truck knew the way. Its leather seat was worn into the shape of me, the steering wheel smooth from the pressure of my hands over 30 years. My father had bought it new. He'd have been 110 this year. He taught me how to drive in this truck. He taught me how to work on it, too. A man who can't fix his own ride, he used to say, is a man who's always waiting on someone else. I wasn't waiting on anyone. I was driving toward them. In the passenger seat, a cooler sat belted him like a person. Inside, 2 racks of ribs and a brisket lay marinating in a bath of my own secret concoction. The recipe was a ghost, a thing of whispers and memory. My grandfather brought the bones of it up from Alabama during the Great Migration. My father added the smoke and the patience. I added the heat. Not just the cayenne, but the slow, insistent fire of hickory wood burned down to coals. The sauce was in a separate jar, a dark, viscous liquid that held the history of our family in its depths. It was my contribution to the annual 4th of July cookout. It was my only required contribution, it seemed. My son, Mark, had called a week prior. The conversation was brief, functional. "Dad, you coming for the 4th? Susan's inviting her whole family." The subtext was clear. Behave. Be a good, quiet ornament for my wife's relatives. "I'll be there," I had said. "I'll bring the meat." A pause on the line. "Great. Just don't go overboard, okay? We've got a lot of food already." Overboard. As if my love, measured out in paprika and brown sugar, was an inconvenience. I'd hung up the phone and gone to the butcher anyway. I knew my work. I knew what a good cut of meat looked like, felt like. I ran a barbecue joint for 40 years. Smitty's Smokehouse. My name is Arthur, but my buddies in the service in Vietnam called me Smitty because of my last name, Smith. The name stuck. The restaurant had been my life's work. It put Mark through college, paid for the down payment on the very house I was driving to. The house where my barbecue was now considered overboard. The sun was high when I finally pulled onto a street. It was one of those suburban streets where every lawn was a perfect green carpet and the trees were all the same polite height. Mark's house was the biggest one. Of course it was. I could smell the cookout before I even parked. But it was the wrong smell. It was the thin, acrid scent of propane, not the deep, soulful perfume of hickory smoke. I parked the truck and killed the engine. The silence that rushed and felt heavy. For a long moment, I just sat there, my hands resting on the worn steering wheel. I could see it in the backyard, a crowd of bright summer clothes milling around a monstrous, gleaming stainless steel grill. It looked like a spaceship. I took a deep breath, the kind you take before you dive into cold water. Then I unbuckled the cooler, hoisted it into my arms, and walked up the driveway. Mark saw me first. He waved a quick, distracted flick of the wrist before turning back to a conversation. He didn't come to help me with the cooler. He didn't come to greet me. I was an expected delivery. Susan, my daughter-in-law, intercepted me at the patio door. She was holding a glass of white wine, smiling a smile that never reached her eyes. "Arthur, you made it. Here, let me get that." She didn't take the cooler. She pointed to a spot on the floor inside, next to a stack of shoes. "Just put it there for now. We've already got the burgers and dogs on." I looked past her into the yard. The giant grill was being manned by Susan's brother, a man named Todd who wore boat shoes and a pink polo shirt. He was flipping burgers with a long, shiny spatula, laughing loudly. "I brought ribs," I said, my voice feeling rusty. "And a brisket." Susan's smile tightened. "Oh, that's sweet, but Todd's got it all under control. We're doing a gourmet hot dog bar this year. It's much more modern." Modern. I looked at the cooler at my feet. Inside, it was 100 years of tradition. 100 years of my family's journey, distilled into spice and smoke. And it was not modern. I nodded slowly. All right, I found a chair in the corner of the patio, away from the main flow of traffic, and I Saturday. I watched. I watched my son, Mark, laugh with his father-in-law. I watched him refill his wife's wine glass. I watched my grandson, Jamal, sitting by himself on the steps, scrolling through his phone, looking as out of place as I felt. He was a good boy. Quiet. He had my eyes. He caught me looking once and gave a small, uncertain smile. I smiled back. An hour passed. No one spoke to me beyond a polite nod. I was a piece of furniture. A silent, gray-haired testament to my son's filial duty. See, my father is here. I'm a good son. Then came the moment. The one that changed everything. It wasn't a lightning strike. It was a quiet sentence, not even meant for my ears. I had gotten up to get a glass of water from the kitchen. The patio door was ajar. Mark and Susan were standing near it, their backs to me. They thought I was still in my corner, a silent fixture. Susan's brother, Todd, walked over to them, wiping his hands on a napkin. Hey, your dad brought a cooler full of meat, Todd said. Should I make some room on the grill for it? Mark let out a short, sharp laugh. A laugh I knew. It was his dismissal laugh. Nah, don't worry about it, Mark said. You know how he is. Susan chimed in, her voice light and condescending. His barbecue is so old-fashioned. All that smoke and heavy sauce, nobody really wants that anymore. It's just a lot. A lot. Old-fashioned. Todd shrugged. All right. His loss. They moved away from the door, their laughter trailing behind them like exhaust fumes. I stood in the kitchen, holding an empty glass. My hand didn't tremble. My heart didn't pound. Something inside me just settled, like dust on a long-abandoned surface. It was the quiet clicking sound of a lock finding its place. I wasn't angry. I was clear. For years, I had been a ghost at these gatherings, a relic to be tolerated. My contributions, my very essence, were an embarrassment to them, an old-fashioned problem they had to manage. I turned around, walked back to the cooler by the door, and picked it up. I didn't say a word. I walked out the front door, down the pristine concrete driveway, into my truck. I placed the cooler back in the passenger seat and buckled it in. My hands moved with a steady, deliberate calm. I got in, turned the key, and the old engine rumbled to life. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror. No one had come out. No one had even noticed I was gone. The 300-mile drive home was different. The hum of the engine was the same, but I was not. I was not driving away from them. I was driving toward myself. The silence in the cab was no longer empty. It was full. It was full of everything I had not said for 20 years. It was full of decisions being made, one after another, like dominoes falling in a perfectly straight line. I didn't stop for dinner. I wasn't hungry. I arrived at my house well after midnight. The street was dark and quiet. My house looked solid, dependable. It had been waiting for me. I carried the cooler inside and set it on the kitchen counter. I didn't open it. Instead, I walked to the pantry and took out the coffee beans. I measured them out, ground them by hand. The rhythmic cranking of the grinder was a comfort. It was a sound of my own making. I brewed 1 cup of coffee. Black. No sugar. I took the cup into the living room and sat in my armchair. The leather sighed as I settled into it. It was the same chair my father had sat in to read the paper every evening. The smell of old leather and wood polish filled my senses. It was the smell of home. Of my home. I took a sip of the hot, bitter coffee. And in the quiet of my own house, surrounded by the ghosts of my own past, I felt a profound sense of peace. The hurt was gone. The dull ache of being an afterthought had vanished. In its place was a hard, clean clarity. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about alignment. It was about making my life, the one I had left, my own. I was done performing the role of the quiet, accommodating father. I was done bringing my heart in a cooler only to have it left by the door. The performance was over. The curtain had come down. I finished my coffee, washed the cup, and placed it in the dish rack to dry. Then I went to my bedroom and slept deeper than I had in years. I woke with the sun. My body felt rested, but more than that, it felt settled. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. I knew what I had to do. I went to my desk and took out a yellow legal pad and a fountain pen. The pen was a gift from my wife, Eleanor, before she passed. Its weight felt good in my hand. Solid. Purposeful. At the top of the page, I wrote a single word, actions. Then I began to make a list. My penmanship was steady and clear. 1, lawyer. 2, bank. 3, David. 4, the house. Each word was a stone being laid for a new foundation. After I finished the list, I made my morning coffee, the same ritual as the night before. Then I sat at my desk and made the first call. Henderson, Black and Associates. How may I direct your call? Mr. Henderson, please. This is Arthur Smith. Mr. Henderson had been my lawyer for 30 years. He handled the papers for the restaurant, the will when Eleanor died. He was a good man. Thorough. He came on the line, his voice a familiar, gravelly calm. Arthur, good to hear from you. Everything all right? Everything is fine, John, I said. I need to make an appointment. I'm making some changes. Of course. How's next Tuesday? How's this morning? I asked. There was a brief pause. I could hear the rustling of papers. I have a cancellation at 10. Can you make it then? I'll be there, I said, and hung up. One down. Next, the bank. I didn't need an appointment for that. I put on a clean shirt, my good denim jeans, and the leather shoes I polished every Saturday night for Sunday service. Looking in the mirror, I saw the lines on my face. They were my father's lines. My grandfather's lines. They were maps of a life lived with patience and endurance. Today, they looked like lines of decision. The bank was cool and quiet. The air smelled of paper and money. I sat down with a young woman named Maria. She was polite and efficient. Mr. Smith, how can I help you today? I slid my account statements across the desk. I want to remove a name from all of my accounts, I said. My son, Mark Smith. She looked at the screen, then back at me. There was a flicker of surprise in her eyes, but her professional mask was perfect. Of course, we could do that right now. I just need your signature on a few forms. She printed the papers. I signed each one with my fountain pen. The ink was a dark, definitive black. With each signature, I felt a weight lift. A tether being cut. For years, Mark had been on my accounts. Just in case, Dad, he'd said, to make things easier. Easier for whom? I had seen the small withdrawals. The little transfers he probably thought I wouldn't notice. 100 here, 200 there. For the kids, he would have said if I'd ever asked. I never did. It was easier not to. Now, things were different. I was making things easier for myself. I left the bank and drove to the lawyer's office. The waiting room was decorated in dark wood and leather. It smelled sterile, but solid. Mr. Henderson greeted me himself, shaking my hand firmly. Arthur, come on in. We sat across from each other at his large mahogany desk. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. So, he said gently, what kind of changes are we talking about? All of them, I replied. I told him I wanted to revoke Mark's power of attorney, both financial and medical. I told him I wanted to rewrite my will. Completely. He listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving my face. He didn't ask why. He didn't pry. He just nodded. All right, Arthur. We can draft the revocation documents today. The will is going to take a bit more time. We need to be specific about your wishes. I know my wishes, I said. I told him everything I owned, the house, the savings, the restaurant, was to be placed in a trust. He raised an eyebrow. A trust for whom? My grandson, I said. Jamal Smith. But he's not to have access to it until he's 30 years old. Until then, it will be managed by an executor. Not your son? He asked, his voice neutral. No, I said. Not my son. I named my pitmaster, David, as the executor. A young man, but steady. Honest. Mr. Henderson made notes on a legal pad. His pen scratched against the paper, the only sound in the room. When I was finished, he looked up. "This is a significant change, Arthur." "I am a significant man," I said, and the words surprised me. I had never thought of myself that way before. But in that moment, I believed it. I left his office an hour later with a folder of paperwork and a deep sense of rightness. The first 2 items on my list were done. When I got home, there was a message on my answering machine. It was Mark. His voice was casual, tinged with a slight annoyance. "Hey, Dad, we noticed you took off yesterday. A little weird to just disappear like that. Susan was worried. Give me a call when you get this." Susan was worried. Not I was worried. Susan. I pressed the delete button. The machine whirred for a second, erasing his voice from my home. It felt good. I spent the afternoon in my workshop. The garage was my sanctuary. It smelled of sawdust and motor oil and time. Against one wall was a large wooden toolbox. My father's. He had built it himself from oak. Inside, his tools lay nestled in felt lining. Wrenches and hammers and saws, their wooden handles dark and smooth with age and use. I had always planned to give it to Mark. It was his birthright. The legacy of a grandfather he barely knew and a father he no longer saw. I opened the lid. I took out each tool one by one. I wiped it down with an oiled cloth. I felt its weight. I remember my father teaching me how to use it, his large, calloused hands guiding my small ones. "Respect the tool, son," he'd say, "and it will respect you." Mark had never shown any interest in these tools. When he was a boy, I tried to teach him. He'd been impatient, easily distracted. He preferred video games and television. He didn't have the patience for the slow, methodical work of fixing things. He only knew how to buy new ones. I finished polishing the last tool, a heavy ball-peen hammer. Then, instead of putting it back in the oak chest, I began to place them in my own, smaller, metal toolbox. The one I used every day. When I was done, the beautiful oak chest was empty. It was just a box, a hollow inheritance. I closed the lid, and the sound echoed in the quiet garage. Later that evening, the phone rang again. I let the machine take it. This time it was Susan. Her voice was sweeter, but with an edge of steel underneath. "Arthur, it's Susan. Mark is getting very concerned. It's not like you not call back. We just want to make sure you're okay. Please call us." Concerned. They were concerned now. Now that the silent, predictable fixture in their lives had moved on its own. I deleted the message. I went into the living room and put a record on the turntable. John Coltrane. The mournful, searching sound of his saxophone filled the house. I sat in my chair and listened. I did not feel lonely. I felt clean. The next day, the text started. My phone, which usually sat silent for days, began to buzz. First Mark, "Dad, are you getting my messages? Call me." An hour later, "Seriously, Dad, this isn't funny." Then Susan, "Arthur, your son is worried sick. This is very childish. Please have the decency to let us know you are safe." Childish. Decency. They were using the words of a script. The script for dealing with a difficult, aging parent. They didn't see me. They saw a problem to be managed. I deleted each text without replying. The act of pressing the small trash can icon was becoming a new ritual. A quiet act of defiance. A digital closing of a door. That afternoon, I tackled the third item on my list. David. David was my pitmaster at the restaurant. I'd hired him 10 years ago. He was just a kid then, eager and hungry to learn. He had a feel for the fire, a patience for the smoke. He respected the craft. He reminded me of myself at that age. I drove to the restaurant in the mid-afternoon, when the lunch rush was over and the dinner prep was just beginning. The smell of hickory smoke hit me as soon as I opened the truck door. It was the right smell. My smell. David was in the back, tending to the smoker. He was a tall, lean young man with kind eyes and hands that were never quite clean of soot. He broke into a wide grin when he saw me. "Mr. Smitty, what are you doing here? I thought you were visiting your family." "Change of plans," I said. "Got a minute?" "For you?" "Always." We sat at one of the checkered cloth tables in the empty dining room. I slid a manila envelope across the table. "What's this?" he asked. "That's the deed to this place," I said, "and the business license, and the bank account information. I had my lawyer sign it all over to you this morning." David stared at the envelope, then at me. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "It's yours, David," I said quietly. "The whole thing. The name, the smokers, the tables. All of it." "But why?" he finally managed to ask, his voice a whisper. "Because it's time," I said, "and because it deserves to be in the hands of someone who understands what it is. Someone who respects it." I took a small, black, leather-bound notebook from my jacket pocket. It was worn at the edges, its pages filled with my cramped handwriting. "And this," I said, placing it on top of the envelope. "This is the recipe. Everything. The rubs, the sauces, the process. Everything my father taught me, and his father taught him." David looked at the book like it was the Holy Grail. His eyes were shining. "Mr. Smitty, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told him. "Just keep the fire burning. Don't ever let it go out." He nodded, his throat working. "I won't. I promise." "There's one more thing," I said. "I've named you the executor of my estate. It's for my grandson, Jamal. My lawyer will be in touch with the details. I trust you to do the right thing by him." He looked overwhelmed, but he nodded again, his expression firm. "You can count on me, Mr. Smitty. You know that." I didn't know that. I stood up to leave. "Oh, and there's a cooler in my truck," I said. 2 racks of ribs and a brisket. They need a good home." David finally smiled, a real smile that lit up his face. "Yes, sir. I'll give them a proper burial." I drove away from Smitty's Smokehouse for the last time. I didn't look back. There was no sadness, just the feeling of a job well done. A legacy passed into the right hands. That night, the voicemails were more frantic. Mark's voice was tight with anger. "Dad, I got an alert from the bank. You took me off the accounts? What the hell is going on? Are you losing your mind? You need to call me. Now." "Losing my mind?" "No, son. I was finding it." Delete. Susan's message followed. A masterpiece of passive aggression. "Arthur, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it's cruel and manipulative. We are worried sick, and you're playing with your finances? Mark is driving up there tomorrow to check on you. We think you may need help." "Help?" They were going to come help me. They were going to come and put their world back in order. Delete. I walked through my house. The house where I brought my wife as a bride. The house where I raised my son. The walls were filled with photographs. Mark as a baby. Mark on his first bicycle. Mark at his high school graduation. A whole life documented in smiling, frozen moments. I walked up to the largest photo, the one taken at his wedding. Me, Eleanor, Mark, and Susan. We were all smiling. I looked at my own face in the picture. Even then, my smile seemed a little tired, a little forced. I reached out and turned the frame around so it faced the wall. One by one, I did the same with all the others. The smiling faces of a life I no longer recognized disappeared, replaced by the blank brown cardboard of the backings. The room felt quieter, less cluttered. The phone rang again. I ignored it, but a few minutes later, it rang again. A different number, one I didn't recognize. On the third ring, something made me pick it up. "Hello, Granddad." The voice was young, uncertain. It was Jamal. My heart gave a lurch. "Jamal," I said, "how did you get this number?" "It's my cell," he said. "Mom and Dad don't know I'm calling. I just wanted to see if you were okay." His voice was genuine. There was no script, no hidden agenda, just concern. "I'm fine, son," I said, and my own voice was thick with emotion I didn't know was there. "They're really mad," he said quietly, "about the bank stuff, and you not answering." I know. There was a long pause. I could hear him take a breath. "Granddad, what they said at the cookout about your barbecue, it wasn't right. I heard them, and it was messed up, and there it was." Validation. From the one person I hadn't expected. The quiet boy on the steps who saw everything. "Thank you for saying that, Jamal," I said. "I like your barbecue," he said, his voice small. "It's the best." I closed my eyes. I remembered him as a little boy, sitting on a stool in my workshop, watching me fix a lawnmower engine. He never asked a lot of questions. He just watched. Absorbed. He had the patience. How would you like to learn how to make it? I asked. Really? The excitement in his voice was a balm on a wound I didn't know was still so raw. Really? I said. But it's a long process. It takes time. I have time, he said quickly. I know you do, I said, and I smiled a real smile for the first time in days. Listen, son. Your father is coming here tomorrow. Things might get difficult. I know, but you and I were okay. You understand? Yeah, Granddad, he said. I understand. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone. The conversation had fortified me. It had reminded me what I was fighting for. Not against Mark and Susan, but for something real. For a connection that wasn't about convenience or duty. For a legacy that could be passed on with love, not obligation. The next morning, I called a real estate agent. The fourth and final item on my list. The house. I told her I wanted to sell. As is. I wanted it done quickly. She was thrilled. A house this size in this neighborhood? It'll be gone in a week, she chirped. I believed her. I was dismantling my old life, piece by piece. And it felt like I was building something new. Something smaller and stronger. At noon, a sleek, black sedan pulled into my driveway. Just as Susan had promised. Mark got out of the driver's side. He was wearing a suit, no tie. He looked like a man coming to handle a business problem. I was waiting for him. I was sitting on the front porch swing, a glass of iced tea in my hand. I didn't get up when he approached. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, his hands on his hips. His face was a mask of frustration. Dad, what is all this? You have us worried sick. I'm fine, Mark, I said calmly. Fine, you disappear from a family party, you don't answer your phone for 2 days, you start messing with your finances. That's not fine. I don't know what that is. He was trying to control his voice, but the anger was leaking through. I'm making some changes, I said. Changes? You sold a restaurant. David called me. He was, I don't know, confused. He said you just gave it to him. My restaurant. My restaurant. The words hung in the air between us. It was never your restaurant, Mark, I said, my voice still even. You never worked a single shift there. You never tended the fire. You never learned the recipes. It was my restaurant, and now it's his. He ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. This is what I'm talking about. You're not thinking clearly. Susan thinks you need to see a doctor. Maybe get an evaluation. The threat was finally out in the open. The ultimate weapon against an aging parent. Declare them incompetent. Take control. For their own good, of course. I took a slow sip of my iced tea. My thinking has never been clearer, I said. I was in my own son's kitchen, and I heard him laugh at me. I heard his wife call my life's work old-fashioned and a lot. His face changed. The anger was replaced by a flash of something. Guilt. Shame. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. You weren't supposed to hear that, he mumbled, looking at the ground. But I did, I said, and it was the clearest thing I've heard in years. It was the truth. You see me as a burden, an old-fashioned problem. That's not true, he said, his voice rising. Isn't it? I asked. You didn't want my food. You didn't want my company. You just wanted my presence. A box to check. Well, I'm unchecking the box. I stood up from the swing. We were face to face now, separated by the porch steps. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in a long time. I think he expected me to be frail, to be confused. But I wasn't. I was solid, rooted. I'm selling the house, Mark. That hit him harder than anything else. His jaw went slack. You're what? You can't. This is our family home. It's my home. I corrected him gently. And I'm selling it. I've made other arrangements. He just stared at me, speechless. All his plans, all his assumptions about his inheritance, about his future, were crumbling in front of him. He saw his safety net disappearing. This is Susan, isn't it? He finally spat out. She got in your head. It was a weak, desperate attempt to find someone else to blame. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. No, son, I said. This is you. This is what you taught me. That my contributions are not welcome. That my ways are old-fashioned. I'm just listening to you. I'm finally, truly listening. I turned and walked to the front door. I have things to do now, I said, my hand on the knob. You should go home to your wife. He didn't move. He just stood there, a man whose world had been tilted off its axis. I opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me. I didn't slam it. I just closed it. The click of the latch was the final sound. The end of a chapter. The beginning of a new one. The house sold in 4 days. The real estate agent was right. I took only what mattered. My father's tools. My wife's photograph, which I had turned back around. My records. My armchair. The rest, I let them sell with the house. It was just stuff. Objects that held memories of a life that was no longer mine. I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It was clean and bright, with a small balcony that overlooked a park. I set up my armchair by the window. I put my record player on a small table beside it. In the second bedroom, I set up my workshop. My father's tools felt at home there. My new life had a rhythm, a quiet, steady beat. I woke up early. I made my coffee. I read the newspaper. Some days I went to the barber shop, not for a haircut, but for the company. My old friend Earl was always there, ready for a game of checkers. He knew something had changed, but he didn't ask. He just refilled my coffee cup and made his move. Your king is in danger, old man, he'd grumble. It's been in danger before, I'd reply. On Saturdays, Jamal would come over. He took the bus across town. I taught him how to break down an engine, how to listen for the misfire, how to change the oil. His hands, at first clumsy and clean, slowly became confident and stained with grease. He was a natural. He had the patience. After we worked on the truck, we would go inside, and I would start the real lessons. I taught him about the smoke, the difference between hickory and oak and pecan. I taught him about the rub, the balance of sweet and salt and heat. I let him measure out the spices, his young face serious with concentration. He wrote everything down in a notebook, just as I had. We didn't talk about his parents. We didn't need to. Our time together was its own world, a space built on shared knowledge and mutual respect. I was not an ornament here. I was a teacher, a grandfather. I was myself. I felt a peace I hadn't realized was missing. It wasn't happiness, not the loud, bright kind. It was deeper than that. It was a sense of being whole, a quiet dignity. I was no longer waiting. Not for a phone call, not for an invitation, not for a holiday. My life was my own, lived on my own terms and my own pace. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was addressed in Mark's handwriting. I recognized the weak penmanship of a disappointing son. I let it sit on the kitchen counter for a full day. I looked at it every time I walked by. I wasn't afraid of what was inside. I was just considering it. The next morning, with my cup of coffee in hand, I slid it open with a butter knife. The letter was short, just a few lines on a single sheet of paper. Dad, it began. I am sorry. I was wrong. I've been wrong for a long time. I miss you. Mark. I read it 3 times. There were no excuses, no justifications, no mention of Susan or money or houses. Just an apology, a beginning. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I sat on the small table next to my armchair. I did not pick up the phone. I did not write back. Not yet. Forgiveness is a slow-cooked meat. It requires time and the right kind of heat. He had taken the first step. He had walked to the door. But the door was still mine to open. And I was not in a hurry. The sun was streaming through my window. John Coltrane was on the turntable, his saxophone weaving a story of sorrow and hope. I took a sip of my coffee. It was strong and bitter and good. It tasted like my own life. It was more than enough. The weight of a family's expectations is a heavy thing. It can bend a man's spine over decades, so slowly he doesn't even notice he's stooped. For years, I carried that weight. I thought it was love. I thought it was duty. I see now it was just gravity. The pull of their needs, their wants, their careless assumptions. And I had allowed it. I had consented through my silence, through my patient endurance. The man who drove 300 miles to be dismissed was not the same man sitting in this chair today. That man is a ghost, a memory. I'm what is left after the fire. Something harder, something truer, something that will not be moved.